Why did she walk toward the gates of Coronado like she belonged there, when every sign told her she should? The storm rolled in hard, waves battering the pier as if the ocean itself wanted to stop her. Rain slashed sideways, turning the docks into rivers of gray, but she kept walking. Each step echoed, boots on wet wood, measured, deliberate. She didn't run from the weather. She didn't flinch from the guards ahead. And that was the first sign. Something about her didn't fit the picture of a civilian caught in the wrong place. She carried a duffel, scuffed and heavy, slung casually over one shoulder. The leather jacket she wore looked older than she was, its seams worn, its color faded by years of use. A drifter, maybe. A woman passing through, that's what most would see, but her eyes told another story. Steel gray, sharp, not wandering, not lost. They had purpose. Naval Base Coronado loomed just beyond the checkpoint, home of the U.S. Navy SEALs. To most, it was a fortress, a symbol. To her, it was something else entirely. Memory, blood, ghosts. The guards noticed her instantly. They always did when someone didn't belong. Two of them shifted as she approached, one lifting a hand. "Ma'am, stop right there." She didn't stop. She reached slowly into her jacket, movements calm, deliberate, almost rehearsed. The younger guard tensed, hand on his weapon. She withdrew a worn ID card, its edges frayed, the lamination bubbled. She handed it forward. "Lieutenant Alexandra Hale." The guard frowned, looked again, then shook his head. "This ID expired 3 years ago. You can't." He didn't finish. Two MPs were already moving in, their boots pounding across wet pavement. One leaned to his earpiece, listening, nodding. His expression hardened. "That's enough," the taller MP said, stepping close. He gripped her arm firmly. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for impersonating a naval officer, specifically a SEAL. You have the right to remain silent." She didn't fight, she didn't argue. Her face, damp with rain, almost looked relieved. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The air smelled of bleach and damp concrete. She sat handcuffed at a steel table, water dripping from her jacket onto the floor. Across from her sat Commander Briggs, a man who'd worn the Navy for 30 years like it was armor. His jaw was set, his skepticism sharper than the creases in his uniform. "You're telling me you were a SEAL?" he asked, leaning forward. "Alexandra Hale, we checked every record. There's no female on any SEAL roster during your claim years. None." Her hands were cuffed, but her voice stayed even calm. "That's because those records are classified beyond your clearance." Briggs smirked, shaking his head. "Convenient." She didn't answer. She just looked at the mirror on the wall, that one-way glass. Someone was watching. "You know what's funny?" Briggs continued. "We get wannabes all the time. They read books, memorize lingo, maybe get a fake trident tattoo. But you," he paused, eyeing her closely. "You didn't slip, not once. No rookie mistakes in terminology. That's impressive, but impressive doesn't make it true." Silence. That silence unnerved him more than any outburst could have. He tapped his pen against the table, restless. She just sat, eyes steady, waiting. Hours dragged. MPs moved to transfer her into federal custody, paperwork signed, chains ready. That's when the door opened. He stepped in. The air shifted instantly. Authority radiated from him, heavy, undeniable. Admiral Robert Cain. His uniform immaculate, his ribbons a wall of silent history. The room shrank around his presence. The MP stiffened. Briggs shot to his feet. "At ease," Cain said quietly, eyes locked on the woman at the table. He didn't glance at Briggs, didn't look at the cuffs, just her. "Remove them." "Sir," Briggs began, but Cain's tone cut sharp. "Now." The cuffs clicked open. She flexed her wrists once, then folded her hands calmly on the table. Cain circled slowly, studying her face like a man peering through time. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Roll up your left sleeve." No hesitation. She pulled the jacket back, tugged the sleeve higher. There it was, ink etched deep into her skin. Not the standard seal trident, this was something else. A variant, unique, recognized only by those who knew the hidden truth. A mark of a team that didn't officially exist. Briggs blinked, confused. "Sir, what?" Cain's voice came quiet, certain. "That tattoo's authentic." Briggs froze. "Are you saying?" Cain looked at him, sharp enough to cut. "I'm saying this woman isn't impersonating anyone. She is who she says she is." The silence afterward felt heavier than the storm outside. Briggs swallowed, unsure whether to believe. She said nothing, only held Cain's gaze. For the first time in years, someone had spoken the truth about her. And yet, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a wound being opened again. Because now the ghost she carried would no longer stay buried. But Cain wasn't finished. He sat opposite her, his eyes unreadable, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I thought you'd never come back." She looked at him steadily, rainwater still dripping from her hair. "I wouldn't have if I had a choice." Her words hung in the air, heavy. And in that silence, every scar, every secret, every moment erased from the record, pressed close, demanding to be told. But not yet. Because there was something else, something Cain didn't know, something no one at this table knew. One of theirs hadn't died, he'd been taken. And Alexandra had come back for only one reason, because the window to save him was closing. What kind of soldier signs up for a war that doesn't officially exist? Alexandra never meant to be that person. She was 19 when the Navy became her escape hatch, a ticket out of a Detroit neighborhood where gunshots sang louder than lullabies, where futures were short and promises meant nothing. She didn't join to be a hero. She joined to survive. And yet somehow she kept surviving. Boot camp hadn't broken her. If anything, it sharpened her. Instructors saw the fire in her eyes, the way she pushed through walls that stopped others cold. She wasn't the strongest, not the fastest, but there was something in her that didn't bend. A stubborn grit, the kind forged when you've already lived too close to the edge. She was meant for the fleet, logistics maybe, a quiet career until someone noticed. They never told her his real name, just that he wore plain fatigues and no insignia. He watched her during training exercises, asked questions that weren't standard, about fear, about loyalty, about what she would sacrifice when no one was watching. The offer came like a shadow, not a promotion, not a new assignment, just a set of coordinates on a folded paper. "Show up or don't," he said. "You'll never hear from us again if you don't." She went. And that's where she met Project Sentinel. It wasn't a base. It was a camp buried in forest, nameless, unmarked. A handful of recruits stood there, men mostly, faces drawn tight with suspicion. They didn't talk much. The instructors talked even less. Days began before dawn and ended only when bodies collapsed. Cold water, long runs, endless drills, simulations that blurred the line between exercise and survival. Alexandra wasn't supposed to make it. They'd chosen her to fail, to watch her crack and wash out, to confirm what the Navy's records said. Women weren't suited for this. But she didn't wash out, she outlasted. When the men fell, she carried their packs. When exhaustion stole breath, she bit down and pushed harder. Every insult, every sideways glance, every whispered bet against her, she used it like fuel. And in time, those men stopped betting. They started following. The instructors noticed. Project Sentinel wasn't about fairness. It wasn't even about skill. It was about who could be shaped into something else. Soldiers erased from rosters, stripped of identity, built into tools for missions the world could never admit existed. Alexandra became one of them. Her team was small, 6 in total. They called themselves Ghosts, not officially, but because that's what they were. They didn't exist, not on paper, not in awards, not even in the Navy's whispered halls. If they succeeded, no one would know. If they failed, no one would claim them. And yet in that strange silence of non-existence, she found family. Mason Graves was one of them, older, steady, The kind of man who could crack a joke in the middle of hell and somehow make it feel survivable. There was Ortiz, sharp-eyed sniper with a dry wit. Daniels, the quiet medic who carried everyone's pain like it was his own. Others, too. Faces blurred by time but etched deep in her memory. Together they became something lethal. Insertion after insertion, terrain after terrain, they slipped into places no one else could. Jungle, desert, city didn't matter. They carried no flags. They left no trace. Their missions were whispers, and when they came home, there were no homecomings, just silence. But it was in that silence Alexandra felt alive. Until the mission that broke them. She never talks about the details. Even now, sitting across from Admiral Cain, the memory cuts too close. A black operation, hostile territory, extraction gone sideways, fire and chaos, men falling, orders clashing. The world became noise and blood. 2 of her team didn't make it out. That was the official line. She remembered their screams, the shrapnel, the blur of running. She remembered waking in a hospital bed, skin burned, lungs raw, told her service was over, told to vanish. But one of them hadn't died, Mason. She'd seen the flash of him dragged away, a shadow disappearing into enemy hands while chaos swallowed the rest. They told her she was wrong, delirious, concussed. They told her it was easier to accept the story. 2 dead, 1 erased, end of file. But she knew. And for years, Alexandra carried that truth like a splinter under her skin. She hunted rumors, tracked whispers across continents, each lead fraying into dust, until last year when the whispers converged. Mason alive, captive, buried deep behind lines no one dared to cross. That's why she'd come back, not to clear her name, not to demand recognition, but to finish the mission no one else even believed existed. Across the table, Cain studied her. He'd known about Sentinel. He'd buried it like the rest, but even he hadn't expected this. "Why now?" he asked, voice low. Her eyes burned steady. "Because the window to get him back is closing, and if we don't act, not only does he die, but the information he carries will make every SEAL team a target." Silence heavy. Cain leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You understand what you're asking, to launch something unsanctioned without record. If this fails, it ends careers. It ends mine." "I'm not asking," she said softly. "I'm telling you what has to be done. With or without you, I'm going." The words hung like a blade. For a moment, Cain's eyes softened, not with weakness but with memory. He remembered her 19-year-old face, fierce and unyielding. He remembered putting her into Sentinel, watching her climb higher than anyone expected. And now, years later, the same fire burned in her eyes. He exhaled slowly. "You always did leave me no choice." By nightfall, wheels were already turning. He called in 3 men he trusted with silence, men who didn't ask why, only packed their gear. They didn't flinch at the sight of her. If anything, they nodded, recognition of one ghost meeting another, though none spoke it aloud. The transport jet lifted into the night, engines humming low, ocean glinting silver below. Alexandra sat strapped in, eyes closed, running through the plan in her head. Terrain, entry, escape. She spoke with the cadence of someone who had done this too many times to count. But under the calm, under the precision, the old ghost stirred. The memory of Mason's laugh, the look in Ortiz's eyes before the bullets fell, the ache of knowing she had survived when others hadn't. She carried all of them with her, because that was the price of being a ghost. And as the plane cut through clouds, she knew, whether they brought Mason home or not, she would never walk away whole. What did it feel like, stepping into a mission you weren't supposed to exist for? The transport jet droned steady over the Pacific, cabin dimly lit by red bulbs that turned faces into shadows. Alexandra sat strapped in, eyes closed, gear tight against her frame. Every click of her harness, every check of her altimeter felt like ritual. She didn't need to look at the men around her to know they were doing the same. They didn't ask questions. That was what struck her most. 3 men Cain had pulled in, old hands, quiet, deliberate. Men who knew the weight of silence, who recognized when words were wasted. She didn't know their stories, not fully. But in the way they moved, in the way they handled their equipment, she saw echoes of the ghosts she once called family. The jet's interior smelled faintly of hydraulic oil and metal, the hum of engines vibrating through her bones. For a moment, she was 19 again, strapped into another plane, surrounded by men who doubted her. Only this time the doubt came not from them, but from herself. She told Cain she could do this. She told herself the same. But beneath the armor, beneath the scars, a quieter truth gnawed. What if she failed again? Mason's face rose in her mind, thinner now, bruised by memory. She pictured him in chains, hearing the sounds of doors locking behind him night after night, waiting for a rescue that never came. How many times had he lost hope? How many times had she promised herself she would bring him back? The intercom crackled, 10 minutes to drop. Cain's voice carried calm, but Alexandra caught the tension beneath. For an admiral, this was no command center with screens and data feeds. This was boots on the ground, the kind of risk that stripped rank down to flesh and blood. She opened her eyes, met his across the cabin. He gave a small nod, not reassurance, not encouragement, just recognition. They were past speeches. She checked her altimeter again. The storm outside had thinned, but the night was still thick, a canvas of black torn by occasional lightning. Perfect cover, imperfect safety. 5 minutes. The men stood, clipping oxygen masks into place, adjusting packs heavy with gear. Alexandra moved with them, tightening her straps, checking the ripcord. Every motion was precise, practiced. And yet her fingers trembled once. She clenched her fist, hid it. She whispered inward, "Don't falter now." The ramp opened. Cold air roared in, slamming into the cabin, whipping hair and straps, dragging every thought into its gale. The world outside was nothing but void, stars swallowed by night, ocean invisible below. Go! One by one, they stepped into the abyss. And then it was her turn. The jump never got easier, not after 100, not after 1,000. The moment of stepping into nothing always ripped at the soul. Her body knew the drill, arch, stabilize, trust the wind, but her mind always whispered, what if it doesn't hold this time? The air clawed at her skin, the rush deafening. She counted breaths, altitude numbers ticking down in her head. Above, the storm swallowed the plane. Below, darkness waited. Her body aligned, movements instinct, as if gravity itself recognized her as an old companion. At 3,000 feet, she pulled. The chute cracked open, yanking hard, stealing her breath. She drifted, wind hissing past, until the ground broke through the black, a smear of jungle, faint glimmers of structures in the distance. The others landed first, silhouettes disappearing into brush. She touched down softer than she expected, knees bending, chute collapsing behind her. In seconds, she gathered it, stowed it, and melted into shadow. The jungle smelled of damp earth and rot. Insects droned a chorus. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. She crouched low, listening. The world had teeth here. They regrouped, 4 shapes in the undergrowth. No words, just hand signals. North, 2 clicks, compound. Alexandra took point. Her senses stretched wide, tuned to every rustle, every shift of wind. She moved like she'd been born for it, silent, precise. Years might have passed, but her body remembered. This was muscle memory written in blood. They slipped past patrol lines, avoiding beams of light that carved through the night. She froze once, hand up, as a guard passed within 10 feet. She could smell the man's sweat, the faint oil of his rifle. He paused, sniffed, frowned. She didn't breathe. Then footsteps faded and he was gone. Her heart hammered once hard, then settled back into its cage. The compound rose out of the jungle like a wound, concrete walls, barbed wire, towers lit by searchlights that swept across trees. Alexandra studied it through night optics, her breath steady. There, cameras on the north side, Patrol gaps every 7 minutes. She signed the plan quick and sharp. Disable breach extract, 20 minutes no more. The men nodded. She crawled forward every inch deliberate. The mud soaked into her sleeves, cold against skin. She reached the first camera, fingers working deftly with a clamp and cutter. A quiet spark, a fizz, then silence. The eye went blind. She signaled move. The others ghosted forward. They worked as one body, each motion feeding into the next. Alexandra slid to the wall, checked her rope, and began the climb. Hands, feet, breath. Halfway up, a spotlight skimmed the wall just below her boots. She pressed flat, invisible. The beam moved on. At the top, she swung over, crouched, rifle raised. One by one, the others followed. Inside the compound, the air was different, thicker. It carried the weight of secrets, of men who screamed in rooms no one would ever see. She could feel it in her bones, the residue of pain. They moved between shadows, hugging walls, ducking behind crates. And then it happened. A sound too sharp, metal against stone. Alexandra's head whipped. A guard turned the corner, eyes widening, rifle lifting. No thought, no hesitation. Her knife was out, flashing. One hand clamped his mouth, the other drew steel across flesh. His body convulsed, stilled, lowered gently to the ground. The others didn't even look twice. Her breath came hard, controlled. The old rhythm, the old darkness. They pushed deeper. Down a narrow hall, through a rusted door. And there, chained to a chair, bruised, thinner but alive, was Mason Graves. For a second, she couldn't breathe. His eyes lifted, dazed, then widened. Recognition cut through the fog. Alex, his voice was hoarse, cracked. Her knife slashed chains, her hand steadied him. No time, she whispered. Move. But even as she said it, something in her gut twisted. Because nothing ever went this easy. And somewhere beyond the walls, alarms waited, just one breath away from screaming. How do you tell someone you never stopped searching for them, when there's no time to speak? Mason's wrist shook as the last chain clattered to the ground. His skin was raw, marked with bruises and half-healed wounds. His eyes, though, still held something Alexandra recognized: defiance. It was buried deep beneath exhaustion and pain, but it was there. For one heartbeat, the world froze. His gaze locked on hers, disbelief etched across his face. Didn't think, his voice broke. He swallowed, tried again. Didn't think you'd come. Alexandra kept her grip on his shoulder, steadying him as he rose. She wanted to tell him she'd never stopped. That every night, every whisper of intel had been about this moment, but words were a luxury they didn't own. You would have done the same, she whispered instead. He nodded faintly, leaning into her as they moved. His weight dragged against her side, each step slow, but she refused to let him falter. Behind them, one of Cain's men checked his watch. 7 minutes gone, too close. And then it happened. The alarm. A shrill, metallic wail ripped through the compound, stabbing into their ears, echoing off walls. Lights blazed alive. Search beams swept across the yard. Shouts erupted in a language thick with anger. Contact, one of the operators hissed. Boots thundered against concrete. Doors banged open. Shadows moved fast, rifles up, eyes scanning. Move, Alexandra snapped, shoving Mason forward. Her rifle was in her hands before the thought even formed. The first guard rounded the corner. Her burst dropped him instantly. The second went down under Cain's shot, precise, unflinching. Muzzle flashes lit the dark, turning walls into stuttering images. Bullets pinged off metal, snapped through air. Alexandra dragged Mason behind cover, chest heaving. Her shoulder burned where the earlier graze throbbed, but she ignored it. Pain was a distraction. Pain could wait. "Can you run?" she asked Mason, her voice clipped. His jaw clenched. He nodded once. "Not fast, but I'll move." "Good enough." The team surged forward. Every hallway felt shorter, narrower, filled with echoes of footsteps chasing them. They fired in bursts, controlled, conserving every round. Every time a guard fell, another seemed to rise from the shadows. At the compound's north side, they hit the wall. Literally. A barricade had been erected since Alexandra's last intel. Barbed wire glinted sharp under floodlights. Beyond it, the jungle, the extraction point, the promise of escape. "Damn it," one of the men growled. No time to curse. Alexandra scanned fast, searchlights sweeping, guards closing in, Mason wheezing at her side. Her mind snapped into the rhythm she knew too well. Assess, act, survive. There, she pointed to a supply stack, crates piled high against the wall. If they climbed, cut fast, they could clear the wire before the compound sealed. Cain didn't hesitate. Go. They sprinted. Gunfire cracked behind them, bullets sparking off crates. Alexandra shoved Mason upward, her back screaming under his weight. He slipped once, but her arms locked around him, forcing him higher. His breath came ragged, but he made it, swinging a leg over. The others followed, covering each other with bursts of fire. Alexandra was last. She scaled the crates as rounds chipped splinters near her hands, the wall looming above. Her boot caught, slipped. For a flash, gravity tugged. A hand grabbed hers, Mason. He pulled, straining with what little strength he had left. She hauled herself up, swung a knife, and sliced the wire clean enough to pass. They dropped to the other side. The jungle swallowed them, but the compound wasn't finished. Searchlights swung beyond the wall, rifles barking, muzzle flashes stabbing through the dark. The team hit the ground running, weaving through trees, mud splashing beneath boots. Every breath felt stolen, every step a gamble. 2 clicks to LZ, Cain shouted. Alexandra pushed Mason forward, her lungs burning. The jungle clutched at them, roots, vines, unseen holes waiting to twist ankles. Behind them, the pursuit was relentless. The first round hit close, snapping bark off a tree near her head. She yanked Mason down, rolled him behind cover, fired blind bursts into the dark. One scream answered. Another shot whistled closer. Her mind screamed back one word, faster. They stumbled into a clearing and froze. Searchlights cut across the open ground ahead, mounted on vehicles that blocked their path. Enemy reinforcements already waiting. Split left, Cain barked. They veered, plunging back into the brush. Gunfire tore into the clearing behind them, ripping leaves, shredding air. Alexandra's arms ached from dragging Mason, but she didn't let go. Her world shrank to 3 things: the pounding of her pulse, the weight of Mason leaning heavy, and the distant thrum of rotors, the sound of salvation. The hello. It was near. But so were the men hunting them. A shout cracked through the night, too close. Alexandra spun, rifle up, dropped another guard before his weapon cleared. She didn't wait to watch him fall. She turned, teeth clenched, eyes locked forward. The trees thinned. A flare lit the sky red, then green, their signal. The helicopter swept in, blades cutting the air, wash flattening the grass. Its spotlight carved across the field, illuminating shapes darting from the jungle. Alexandra shoved Mason toward it, her throat raw from shouting. Go! Cain and the others laid down, suppressing fire, holding the line as Mason stumbled toward the ramp. His body looked like it could collapse any second, but his legs kept moving, stubborn. Alexandra was right behind, rifle spitting bursts until the mag clicked empty. She drew her sidearm, fired until it was dry, then hurled it aside. Hands grabbed Mason, pulled him into the bird. Cain followed, barking orders. The engine screamed louder, desperate. Alexandra sprinted the last 10 yards as a round tore past her ear. Another grazed her thigh, hot and searing. She didn't stop. She launched herself up the ramp, rolling inside as the bird lifted, gunfire chasing them from below. The compound shrank in the distance, chaos a fatting smear of light and sound. The jungle fell away. The night swallowed everything else. Inside the cabin, Mason collapsed against the bulkhead, chest heaving. Sweat soaked his shirt, blood matted his skin, but he was alive. His eyes found hers again, softer this time. "You really came." Alexandra sat across from him, lungs burning, shoulder bleeding, body shaking with exhaustion she couldn't afford to show. She managed a faint, steady smile. "You would have done the same." For the first time since the storm on the dock, relief cracked her armor. Just a flicker, just enough. The rotors thundered, carrying them back toward the ocean, away from the fire. And yet, even as Mason closed his eyes, even as Cain exhaled like a man holding a secret too heavy, Alexandra's gaze stayed fixed on the dark horizon. Because something in her gut whispered this wasn't over. Not yet. What happens when the gunfire stops, but the ghosts do? The helicopter roared steady, carrying them away from the burning jungle. The cabin smelled of sweat, cordite, and blood. Alexandra sat slumped against the wall, shoulder bleeding through her torn jacket, her thigh throbbing from the graze. She barely felt any of it. Her eyes were locked on Mason. He sat opposite, his head tilted back against the bulkhead, chest heaving in shallow bursts. In the harsh cabin light, his bruises told stories she didn't want to imagine. The swollen lip, the cuts across his knuckles, the weight of days, weeks, maybe months, etched into the way his body sagged even while sitting. He was alive, that was what mattered. She kept repeating it in her head like a mantra. Alive, alive. Cain moved down the narrow cabin, crouching near Mason. "Medic kit," he barked. One of the operators passed it forward. Cain's hands weren't gentle, but they were steady. He pressed gauze to wounds, checked pupils, worked with the efficiency of a man who'd patched up soldiers in places no one else would admit existed. "You're stable for now," he muttered, almost to himself. Then his eyes lifted, pinning Mason. "But when we land, you'll need a hospital. No arguments." Mason gave a faint, dry laugh that turned into a cough. "After what you just pulled, hospital's the least of our problems." Cain's expression hardened. "What do you mean?" Mason's gaze flicked toward Alexandra. He didn't speak immediately. His lips pressed tight, like he was weighing words too heavy for the air. She leaned forward, her voice low but steady. "Say it." His eyes found hers again. And there it was, the unspoken bond that no years, no chains, no silence could erase. He trusted her, still. "They didn't keep me alive just to break me," Mason said finally. His voice was hoarse, but the words carried sharp. "They kept me alive because of what I know, because of what I carried out of Sentinel." Cain froze. Alexandra's stomach nodded. "Intel?" Cain asked. Mason shook his head faintly. "Not intel, codes, backdoors. We were part of more than just black ops insertions. We were test cases for something bigger. Systems no one admitted existed. They figured out who I was, and they knew what I had access to. I didn't give them anything. But," he swallowed hard, "they know enough now to go looking." The cabin fell into silence, except for the chop of rotors. Alexandra's mind raced. Project Sentinel wasn't just bodies thrown at impossible missions. She'd always known there was more, that the training, the secrecy, the way they'd been erased had purpose beyond fieldwork. But hearing it from Mason, it made her blood run cold. Cain's jaw tightened. If they're digging for that kind of access, then every SEAL team, every classified operation we run is compromised. Mason's voice cracked, his strength faltering. "That's why they didn't kill me. That's why they'll keep coming." The truth settled over them like another weight they couldn't shed. Saving him had only been the beginning. Alexandra's eyes lingered on his face, softer now. Relief and dread warred in her chest. She'd come back to bring him home, but what she'd actually brought back was a storm. The helicopter jolted as it banked, the ocean spreading wide beneath. Coronado's lights shimmered faintly on the horizon, like a mirage. For the rest of the flight, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Every man in that cabin understood what Mason's words meant. This wasn't just rescue, it was ignition. When they touched down, the blades kicked salt air into whirlwinds. MPs and medics rushed forward, their boots slapping the tarmac. Cain stepped out first, his presence enough to silence the questions that began to form. Alexandra followed, her arm hooked under Mason, as they half-carried him down the ramp. The medics tried to take him immediately, but Mason gripped Alexandra's sleeve with surprising strength. His eyes burned into hers. "Don't let them bury this," he rasped. Her chest tightened, she gave a small nod. "I won't." Only then did he release her. They guided him onto a stretcher, loading him into a waiting transport. For a moment, she stood there in the wash of rotor wind, jacket flapping, hair whipping across her face, watching as the vehicle pulled away. Cain's voice cut through. "You need treatment too." She turned, gave him a flat look. "Later." "Alex." "Later," she repeated sharper. He studied her, then sighed, recognizing the immovable wall she always became after missions. He gestured instead toward a quieter path, away from the cluster of MPs. They walked in silence until the noise of the landing zone faded. The night air smelled of salt and diesel, familiar and grounding. Cain stopped near the edge of the dock, where the water slapped against pylons. "You realize what this means," he said finally. Her gaze stayed on the dark water. "I realize I dragged him out of hell, and now the fire followed us home." Cain's lips pressed tight. "This isn't just about Mason. If what he says is true, there's a network bigger than Sentinel still running, pieces no one admitted to, files even I don't have clearance for. If those codes are breached, they'll dismantle everything from the inside." Alexandra turned to face him. Her voice was low, steady, but there was fire in it. "Then we don't wait for them to come, we go first." Cain studied her for a long moment. She could see the war inside him, the admiral who'd built a career on order and secrecy, and the soldier who knew sometimes silence was the greatest risk of all. Finally, he nodded once. "There'll be no record of this, no approval. If we do it off the books, again." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "That's the only way I know how." For a moment they just stood there. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving the sky washed in pale moonlight. The air was still, but Alexandra could feel it, the tension, the weight of something bigger gathering on the horizon. Mason was alive. She'd done what she came to do. And yet, instead of closure, all she felt was the next battle waiting. The kind you couldn't run from. The kind that came looking for you in the dead of night. What does survival feel like when the world pretends you don't exist? The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and old air conditioning. Machines beeped quietly, steady rhythms that marked life but didn't guarantee it. Mason lay on the bed, his face half hidden in shadow, oxygen tube running along his cheek. He looked smaller here, stripped of the armor she remembered. For the first time in years, Alexandra could see the toll, the weight of captivity written in his body. She sat in the corner, hands clasped, her jacket draped across the chair. She hadn't left since they brought him in. The medics had wanted her gone, but Cain had given a single look and the arguments died on their lips. Hours bled into each other. Sometimes Mason stirred, muttering half-formed words from dreams too raw to name. Sometimes he opened his eyes and found hers, grounding himself in the simple truth that she was there. And sometimes he slipped away again, and she felt the hollow fear she'd lived with since the night Sentinel fell, that one day she wouldn't be able to pull him back. Cain came at dawn. His steps were quiet, his uniform as sharp as ever, but his eyes carried sleeplessness. He stood at the foot of the bed, watching Mason breathe. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Cain said, "He'll live, but whether he'll ever be cleared for active duty again, that's another question." Alexandra's voice was flat, but her eyes didn't move from Mason. "Active duty doesn't matter. He's already given more than enough." Cain's gaze shifted to her. "You sound like someone who's forgotten the only currency this world still respects." She looked at him then, really looked, at the rows of ribbons on his chest, the weight of decades spent inside an institution that had both defined him and devoured him. She shook her head faintly. Respect isn't what kept him alive in there. Or me. It was something else. Cain didn't reply. Maybe he didn't have an answer. The silence stretched. The only sound was the beep of the monitor, steady, stubborn. Alexandra rose, moving closer to Mason's bed. She brushed a hand lightly against his wrist, not a caress, more an anchor. His skin was warm, scarred, real. But the ghosts pressed in all the same. Ortiz's laugh, Daniel's steady hands, faces of men she'd lost and never been allowed to mourn. Her team had been wiped from records, their names buried so deep even families didn't know the truth. And here she was, alive when so many weren't. A ghost among ghosts. Cain's voice broke the thought. There's movement already. Mason was right, the codes are in play. Signals intercepted out of the Pacific, chatter buried in channels that should have been clean. They're testing doors. Her jaw tightened. And how long before one opens? Not long, Cain admitted. His face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed the weight pressing in. If they succeed, entire teams could walk into ambushes without ever knowing why. Bases could go dark. Missions burned from the inside. Alexandra turned to him, fire rising in her chest. Then stop waiting. Assemble what we need. We hit them before they hit us. Cain studied her, his silence deliberate. Finally, he said, "You've been gone a long time, Alex. You're not on any roster. To most of the Navy, you don't exist." Her lips curved into something sharp, not quite a smile. "That's the advantage, isn't it? No record, no trace. I was built for this." The weight of her words hung heavy. She knew the cost of that truth better than anyone. Living in the shadows meant never being recognized, never being remembered. But if it kept the others alive, if it kept Mason alive, she would carry it again. Cain nodded once, the kind of nod that sealed decisions without paperwork. "I'll make the calls." He left quietly, his presence fading down the hall. Alexandra sat again, watching Mason's chest rise and fall. For the first time since the docks, exhaustion crashed over her. Her body screamed for rest, her wounds burned, but she couldn't close her eyes. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "They erased us, but they'll remember us now." Mason stirred faintly, his lips moving. She leaned close, catching the words. "You stayed." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything. The years of silence, the nights she'd woken from dreams of gunfire and smoke, the faces she carried like weights. Instead, she just answered with the only truth that mattered. "Always." His hand twitched, as if reaching for hers, then fell still again. He drifted back into the shallow rhythm of healing. Alexandra leaned back, staring at the ceiling, her jaw clenched against the ache in her chest. She had saved him, but saving someone never ended the story. It just began another. And somewhere beyond these walls, in shadows even Cain couldn't fully see, the enemy waited with keys they should never have held. The kind of keys that could burn the world from the inside out. What do you say to someone you left behind when words will never be enough? The hospital quieted after midnight. The halls emptied, the hum of voices faded, leaving only the occasional shuffle of nurses and the low murmur of machines. Alexandra sat by Mason's bed, her jacket folded across her lap, her eyes fixed on the man who'd once carried her pack through deserts and jungles without complaint. Mason stirred, lids fluttering, then slowly opened his eyes. He blinked against the dim light, his gaze finding hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally he rasped, "You look the same." A faint, humorless smile tugged at her lips. "That's a lie, and we both know it." His laugh was hoarse, broken by pain, but real. He shifted, wincing, adjusting against the pillow. His voice was softer when he spoke again. "I thought about this moment, about what I'd say if I ever saw you again. And now, I don't have the words." She leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, eyes steady. "You don't need words." But she knew what he meant. She thought about it too, the faces of her ghost team haunting her nights, Mason among them. She replayed the moment he'd been dragged away 1,000 times, wondering if she could have done more, if she should have gone left instead of right, fired one more shot, bought him one more second. Survivor's guilt was a weight that never left, and tonight it pressed heavy. "You shouldn't blame yourself," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Her jaw tightened. "I don't." He gave her a look, half skeptical, half gentle. "You always were a terrible liar." She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "I was supposed to get everyone out that night. I didn't. 2 died. You were taken, and I—" Her voice faltered, then steadied with effort. "I lived. Sometimes that feels like the worst failure of all." Mason's eyes softened. "You carried us further than anyone could have. You carried me tonight." His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. "You didn't fail. You survived. And survival is what gave me a chance to see you again." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire, but not unbearable. It was weighted with truth. He reached for her hand, fingers trembling, and this time she didn't pull away. His grip was weak, but it was there. Flesh and blood. A connection neither time nor captivity had broken. "You know," he murmured, his eyes drifting half shut, "there were nights in that place. I'd close my eyes and I'd hear your voice, telling me to keep moving, telling me not to give up." Her throat burned. She forced her voice into something steady. "Then I guess I did my job even from a distance." His lips curved faintly. "You always did." They sat like that for a while, the world shrinking to the quiet beeps of the monitor and the steady pulse of his hand against hers. For a moment, it almost felt like the war was behind them, like this was just 2 soldiers catching breath after a long fight. But she knew better, and so did he. Cain arrived in the early hours, his presence as sharp as ever despite the hour. He stood in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room. He didn't comment on the hands clasped between them. He didn't need to. "It's time," he said simply. Alexandra let go of Mason's hand gently, rising to her feet. Mason looked up at her, his eyes filled with the same silent plea she'd felt since the day she found him chained. "Don't go back into the fire." But she did what she always had. She gave him the truth, not the promise he wanted. "I'll be back." He swallowed hard, nodded once and closed his eyes. Cain led her out into the hall, his pace brisk, his words low. "We've intercepted fragments. Whoever's pulling strings has already tested Sentinel's back doors. Small breaches enough to prove access. They're not hitting hard yet, but when they do," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. They walked past windows that overlooked the base. Dawn was breaking, washing the ocean in pale gold. The storm had passed, but Alexandra knew better. The storm was only changing shape. "Who's behind it?" she asked. Cain's expression was grim. "Not a country, not officially. A network. Contractors, ex-military, maybe even people from inside. Ghosts of their own kind. Men who know how to hide in plain sight. Men who know us because they used to be us." The words landed heavy. Alexandra stopped walking. Her voice was colder when she asked, "How many?" Cain shook his head. "Too many for us to name yet, but enough to burn teams across the globe if they get what they're after." She folded her arms, eyes narrowing. "Then we don't just chase shadows, we cut the line at the source." He gave her a sidelong glance. "And you think you can find it?" Her answer was steady. "I've lived as a ghost longer than anyone in this Navy. If they're hiding, I'll find them." Cain didn't argue. He only gave the faintest nod, the kind that acknowledged he'd already made his decision hours ago. "We'll need a team," he said. "Not big, not loud. People who can vanish as easily as they appear." Her lips curved faintly. "Ghosts." For a brief moment, Cain's eyes held something almost like pride. "Ghosts." They walked on in silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down like gravity. Alexandra felt the ache in her wounds, the fatigue pulling at her bones, but none of it mattered. She'd carried heavier. She'd been erased before. And if that was what it took again, she would do it. Because Mason had survived, but survival wasn't the end. Survival was only the reason to keep fighting. And the fight wasn't finished. Not yet. What does it take to erase a shadow? The briefing room was small, windowless, and dim. No flags on the wall, no recorders, just 4 men, 1 admiral, and a woman who technically didn't exist. Alexandra studied the map spread across the table, her fingers tracing the faint red circles that marked the network's nodes. Cain's voice was low, steady. "We've narrowed it. Their hub sits offshore. A platform retrofitted from an old drilling rig. Private security on the surface, but what matters is below. Servers. The codes Mason warned us about. That's where they keep them." Alexandra's eyes lifted. "And if we cut the servers?" Cain's lips pressed thin. "They lose access. Every door they've pried open slams shut. But there's no half measure. Either we destroy the hub completely, or they adapt and strike harder." The room went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't an arrest. It wasn't a seizure. It was destruction, off the record, off the books. A mission the world would never know about, carried out by people the world didn't believe existed. Alexandra rolled her sleeve higher, the ink of her tattoo catching the light. "Then we burn it." They launched under cover of night. The sea stretched black and endless beneath the transport, moonlight glinting off waves. The platform loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette bristling with floodlights and antennae. A false city in the ocean, pulsing with stolen power. The ghosts, Cain's men and hers, moved with quiet precision, gear checked, weapons loaded, breaths measured. Alexandra felt the old rhythm returning, a heartbeat she hadn't known she still carried. For a moment it almost felt like Sentinel again. But there were fewer faces now, fewer voices. And that was the price, always the price. They dropped by fast rope, sliding down into shadows at the platform's edge. The air reeked of oil and salt. Guards patrolled above, rifles slung carelessly. Alexandra crouched low, signaling forward. One by one, the team slipped into the underbelly. The descent felt endless. Stairs creaked, metal groaned. Down into the bowels of the rig, where the hum of servers filled the air like a swarm of bees. Blue light flickered against concrete walls. There it was, rows of racks, cables snaking like veins, the heart of the network. Alexandra approached, her pulse steady. For years she'd been the weapon sent to tear down threats no one could name. And here it was again, another secret, another enemy hiding behind shadows. Cain's voice crackled in her earpiece, charges set. Her fingers worked fast, planting explosives with methodical care. Each click, each wire another promise, another choice that could never be undone. Then the sound. Boots on metal, voices too many. She froze. The enemy had expected them. Gunfire erupted, harsh and deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets sparked off metal, tearing into racks of servers. Lights strobed, alarms shrieked. Alexandra dove behind cover, firing back, her shoulders screaming with each recoil. One of the ghosts went down, hit clean through the chest. His body collapsed against the servers, blood mixing with sparks. Alexandra clenched her jaw, pushed harder. No time to mourn, no time to falter. She caught a glimpse of their enemy through the chaos, men in black gear, faces masked, moving with the precision of people who knew the same drills she did. Former military, maybe even former ghosts, a mirror of herself twisted and turned. The thought cut deeper than the bullets. Cain's voice thundered in her ear, "Finish it." Her hands moved fast, last charge locked in. She slammed the trigger device into place, her lungs burning. The countdown blinked red. 90 seconds. "Out," she shouted, voice raw. The ghosts pulled back, dragging the wounded, firing in bursts to keep the enemy pinned. Alexandra moved last, covering, her fingers squeezing until her rifle clicked dry. She hurled it aside, drew her sidearm and fought step by step toward the stairwell. A masked soldier lunged from the side, knife flashing. Alexandra twisted, pain searing as the blade grazed her ribs. She drove her own knife into his throat, eyes locking with his as he fell. His mask slipped, just enough for her to see not a stranger, an American face. Her chest tightened. This wasn't foreign. This was home eating itself alive. The timer blinked, 30 seconds. They burst into the open air. The sea wind hit hard, mixing with the reek of smoke and oil. Cain's men fired at shadows chasing them across the deck. A spotlight flared, and Cain himself cut it down with a burst that echoed like thunder. "Go!" Alexandra shoved the last of the team onto the rope ladder that led to their waiting craft below. She climbed fast, every muscle screaming. Behind her, the charges detonated. The rig convulsed, a roar splitting the night. Fire tore upward, shredding steel, sending flames clawing at the sky. The servers, the codes, the network, it all vanished in a storm of sparks and smoke. The blast wave hit the water as their boat peeled away, spray soaking their faces. Alexandra turned, watching the inferno collapse in on itself, metal screaming as it sank into the Black Sea. It was over. Or so it seemed. The survivors sat in silence, the only sound the engine's growl and the hiss of waves. Cain stood near the bow, his face lit orange by the burning ruin behind them. For once his mask cracked. Weariness, grief, relief. Alexandra sat at the stern, her knife still streaked with blood, her chest heaving. She stared at the flames, at the shadows of men who would never return. Another mission, another cost. She thought of Mason, lying in a hospital bed, whispering that she had stayed. She thought of Ortiz, Daniels, and the others erased from history. She thought of herself erased, yet still here. The world would never know what they had done tonight. And maybe that was how it had to be. Cain's voice carried low, almost to himself. No record, no medals, just ashes. Alexandra's gaze stayed on the horizon, her voice quiet but unshaken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The boat cut through the dark water, carrying them toward a dawn that would never tell their story. But she didn't need it to. Some truths didn't need headlines. They only needed to be remembered by the ones who knew.